Hey Solon, my name is Emily Moser and I am the halftime instructional coach and halftime sim instructor here at SIS. And I'm going to just kind of take you through some of the hard work that our teachers have been putting into all this running record and MSV stuff that you're hearing about to help our students become the best readers that they possibly can be. So what you're going to see today is I'm going to go grab a student and we are going to read a story together. You can follow along with my coding. And then I'm going to ask her just a couple comprehension questions just to give you an idea of what that looks like. And then I will also go through more of the scoring and analysis piece behind it that you've been hearing about with this MSV and kind of show you how we use that data to drive our instruction and our responsiveness for their teaching and just how we provide the best support for those students. So hope you enjoy. Okay, Miss Bailey, so we have been reading on stage together and talking a little bit about some of the things that we've noticed in here with the characters, right? Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do today is you are just going to go to page 13 and I'm going to listen to you read some more, but I just want you to think about, before we start, so with Jane and Barry, what were some of the differences between those two that we noticed in the beginning of the story?
Jane always picked. Oh wait, no. But Barry always picked on Jane.
Yeah, he was kind of full of being like a teaser, wasn't he? He'd always pick on her. And what did you, like, how was Jane feeling, or how would she act when that happened?
She never knew what to say back, so her friend would help her.
Yeah, her friend would kind of stand up for her, right? Very good. Okay, so purpose for reading today is for me to listen, but then I also want you to notice whether the relationship between Barry or Jane changes kind of at the end of the story, okay?
Okay.
All right, so page 13, whenever you're ready, dear.
The curtain rose. When it was time for the last chimpanzee's big entrance, Barry swung on a vine, but he stumbled over his own feet. Without thinking, Jane reached out an arm, grabbing a branch. Barry steadied himself and shot her a quick, grateful look. When he began his speech, Alone I stand, the last of my kind, a victim of war and waste. Will you? Suddenly, Barry froze. He'd forgotten his line. He was a big pain, but there in front of all these kids in the audience, Jane felt sorry for him. When Jane thought of something else to say, "You know, I was rooting for you out there." Barry turned around. He wasn't grinning as usual. "You knew my lines, your lines, and probably everyone else's lines too," he said. "Next time, you should try out for a bigger part." Jane smiled. Next time, maybe she would.
Hey, awesome job, girl. Okay, so I want to take you back to page 16. Will you go back there for just a sec? So I want to read back to you what I heard you say on this one, okay, and see if you notice anything. So I heard you say, when Jane thought of something else to say. How do you think that one should sound? What do you notice about that?
It should be then.
Okay, it should be then. And what did you notice how your voice sounded at the end there?
It went when Jane thought of something else to say.
Yeah, it almost seemed like we were going to kind of continue the sentence, but what do you notice is
There's
the end?
a period.
Yeah, so what would that sound like instead? Could you try that again?
When Jane thought of something else to say.
Now, try it with the...
Then Jane thought of something else to say.
Perfect, good. And what did we talk about with this word? What would we want to do with that, do you think?
You raise your voice.
So could you model that for me?
You know, I was rooting for you out there.
Very good. So your intonation is getting better and you really pay attention to some of the emphasis that we should put on some of those big words. Awesome. So kind of coming back to that purpose for reading, we wanted to look and notice whether the relationship between Barry and Jane had changed. How can you tell me, or can you tell me just a little bit more about what you noticed in this story? Did it change?
Yeah. He started not like teasing her anymore because she knew everyone's line and her own line.
Yeah. And what about, like, what can you tell me about this page a little bit more?
He was serious instead of goofing around.
Yeah. So we kind of learn what would be like that lesson that we might be able to learn from this story, or kind of that big idea that kind of happened. What did you say?
That they shouldn't tease people.
Shouldn't tease people. That could maybe work, and that could be something that we could apply in our own life too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so Bailey, last question. What is the genre of this book?
It's realistic fiction.
Yes, and how do you know that?
Because it's not nonfiction, because it doesn't have real pictures, but it's not fiction because it could actually happen.
Yes, that's the key right there, because it can actually happen. Awesome. Way to go, girl. Proud of you. Okay. Okay, so now that I have read with Bailey and we've gone through, I have taken some time to go through and score and analyze her reading record, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through the marks that I made, why I made them, and what my next steps would be. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of take you through this running record of On Stage that I read with Bailey. So as you can see, it just has all of the words that she was reading from pages 13 to 15, which were the last 3 of the book. And you'll see that there's an E for error, which is if she read something incorrectly. And then there's an SC, which means self-correct. So that would be when she went back to fix an error that she had made. And then we analyze both the errors and the self-corrects using M, S, and V. So MS and V stands for meaning, which would just be, could that insertion that she had made with that, or that substitution, make sense? Or would it break down the meaning of the story? And I'll kind of talk through that. Or else there's also structure, which we try to just think of it more as grammatically. Could that actually work and still make sense? Or would it just kind of throw it off and they don't realize that? And then visual would be, are the letters or patterns close or similar? And I'll point out some of those as well. So basically when I go through this, the first thing that I noticed was Bailey had just left out, which we call an omission, within. So she had just skipped over and said Barry swung on a vine. So that would be an error. And when they leave out words, which we call an omission, or if they just insert a word when that's not on the page, we actually can't analyze it because we don't know why they had done that. So we just kind of leave that part blank. But then as you went down, you probably saw that I drew this line through here. And when Bailey was reading this part, she had just said, without thinking, Jane reached out for an arm, grabbing a branch. So she really didn't tune into that period there and just kind of went through that punctuation. So I made a note for myself that a possible next step for her could be some fluency instruction, maybe using the 6 dimensions of fluency and really hitting that pausing to help her just realize that normally we would need to have a small pause in our breath there. You'll see that for this one, she had said grabbing a branch, Barry steadied himself. So she was starting to try to solve a different word, but she corrected it right away. And then continued until she came down to when for then. So when I analyzed this, she didn't correct it, so that is why I have a mark in error here. And you only read up to the mistake that the student made. So when I look at this first one, really what I need to do is cover up the rest of this sentence. So I'm only reading up to the beginning of that sentence. So for this one, it's interesting because it's just the first word of the sentence. So really you could say when. It still makes sense. And when you look at visually, you still see H-E-N in both when and then. So I would count that as all meaning, structure, and visual for her error there. So she's using all 3 of those, which is actually what you want to see. You want to see a balance of them all across the board there and hope that they're using all 3 of those. So later on, all this one means is that when she read this, she had repeated those. So a victim of war and waste. So I just put a repeat and mark how far back she had reread that. Later on, we got to a self-correct here. So she had said, suddenly Barry froze. He'd forgotten his line. So she noticed and tuned into that he would not match since there's a D. So we go over, and since she's self-corrected, it doesn't count as an error, but it counts as a self-correct. With her error, the first time we analyzed both what she did as her error and then what she did for her self-correct. So when she first said he, really that would not change the meaning any, because again, it's the first word of the sentence, so we wouldn't be looking past that. Meaning wise, it still works. Structurally, it makes sense, and then visually it matches even though she didn't have the D on there. And that's what we would say probably prompted her to self-correct, is that when she said he, she wasn't looking all the way through that word and noticed right away that she needed to change that to heed. So that would be a visual self-correct. And then again, she started trying to sound out, probably plain is what we would infer, but fixed it immediately and said pain. And then with there and here, that she didn't change that one or self-correct, so that would still be an error. And when you look at it, if you were to read it up to that point, again, you could say he was a big pain, but there, and that would work. So structurally it works. It doesn't change the meaning of the story, and visually it's very similar because you have H, E, R, and E. So again, we'd hope to see that she's looking at the beginning of the word to notice that it here does not start with a T. So with that, I could go to my prompting guide that has been provided by Fontes and Pinnell, and I could go to, there will be all different kinds of tabs based on what kids need. So if I wanted to go to structure and meaning, I could go right down to what I had told you, that an area for me to prompt and teach her would be structure. So these might be some of the things that I would teach beforehand in my next lesson, or I might be prompting her when she's reading, when I'm taking anecdotal notes or giving her a teaching point, and then hopefully just seeing that carry over and transfer into some of her next books that she's reading with me. So I didn't do a complete comprehension check because this is definitely an area that Bailey is very strong in, and I got a ton of information based on these first parts already that showed me that I really don't need to focus as much on summarizing, which would be that within the text. And for the most part, she really got through the beyond the text in just some of that conversation. So this isn't supposed to be like an interrogation or just the questions asked verbatim necessarily. We really try to keep it a conversation with the child. And in that, I was able to gather a lot of the information in here, and I just didn't really write that down for the sake of time for you guys. So based on what I analyzed from Bailey's reading record, some of my next steps that I would do with her is that I noticed that a lot of her errors didn't really influence any of the meaning of the story, so I don't really need to focus on that, but I need to make her more aware that her errors don't really match what the text is saying. So that would be some of that visual and structural prompts that I could be providing her, which might just be, does that look or make sense? Does that sound or look right? Could be some of the things that I could say with her to help, and I might even just have her go back in and I would reread what I heard her saying and make her more aware that that doesn't match, so she could see that and help take that upon herself. So basically I could turn to my prompting guide that FNP has provided us with and use some of the prompts in there to help teach and say to her either as teaching points beforehand or give her throughout her reading record. But otherwise, she would probably, I could keep her in this level Q and keep instructing her there because technically that's an instructional level for her, but it's a high instructional level. So I could also look in my literacy continuum to know what I needed to do in that next level to provide some supports to help take her to that next level. But otherwise, if you have any other questions about reading records or any of the support that we've been providing, you feel free to reach out, whether you want to call me at SIS or email me. It's great. We'd be happy to answer any questions or give you some more information of the great work that teachers are doing here. Thank you.